I'll tell you though, I never had a problem with Jinny's weight. To me, she's beautiful. Rubenesque. That woman is my life. To think she's being my... Look, Jack, I'm not gonna sit here and deny that Ralph could be a fucking asshole.
So someone brought up a really interesting point about Jinny Sack. The idea that, putting everything else aside, she was actually quite beautiful. Not just in looks, though she did have a pretty face and always had her makeup done nicely, but also in the way she carried herself. She was kind, loyal, and deeply loving to her husband, Johnny. Compared to most other relationships in that world, theirs stood out. You didn't see them bickering constantly or involved in messy affairs. They seemed genuinely in love. Welcome to Sopranos Breakdown. I'm Matthew, and joining me today is Matthew. Together, we'll break down the world of Tony, Carmela, and the rest of the crew, uncovering hidden details and diving into the deeper meanings of every episode. Let's get started. People started reflecting on that. It was mentioned that even when things got tense, like that unseen in the laundry room where John caught her sneaking sweets, it wasn't really about the food. John was overwhelmed. He was dealing with the pressure of having to kill Ralph and the emotional weight of everything going on. That outburst wasn't really about Jinny, it was about everything crashing down at once. And still, even then, you saw the depth of their connection. He never once pressured her to lose weight. In fact, he got upset that she felt the need to change herself to make him proud. He told her, clearly and tenderly, that he already was proud of her, that he loved her. That moment really resonated with people. Some said it choked them up every time they saw it. It revealed how deeply that cruel joke about her weight had hurt Johnny. Not just because of the words, but because he knew how much it would hurt her. It showed how much he truly cared. There was also some talk about the actress who played Jinny. Turns out she wasn't even planning to audition for the role. She had only gone to support a friend. And somehow, she landed it. Just goes to show how sometimes things find you. Sadly, people noted she passed away young, only 46. That hit hard for a lot of folks. Naturally, the conversation took a few humorous turns. Jokes about Rubenesque figures, sandwiches, and some wild banter typical of that kind of group dynamic. It got chaotic at times, but underneath it all, there was a clear appreciation for Jinny as a character. She stood out not because of drama or scandal, but because of her sincerity. Her relationship with John, as unconventional as it might seem, was one of the few in that world that felt grounded in real affection and trust. Someone pointed out that, unlike other women in that world, who were constantly being cheated on or manipulated, Jinny seemed genuinely cherished. Even when she snuck food or struggled with diets, the biggest conflicts in their marriage came from a place of care and misunderstanding, not betrayal or resentment. In the end, that's what stuck with people, that quiet, understated bond they shared. Flawed, sure. Messy, definitely. But real in a way that was rare in that environment. It's the kind of relationship that lingers with you, not because it was perfect, but because they accepted each other as is. You ever notice how Tony was always watching war documentaries whenever he had a quiet moment? Like, anytime he wasn't handling business or tangled up in something, you'd see him planted on the couch, ice cream in hand, glued to the History Channel. It made you wonder, was there something deeper going on there? Some people think it's just part of his self-image. He saw himself not just as a mob boss, but as a general, a leader, commanding an army, fighting his own kind of war. That whole soldier mentality shows up a lot with him. In his world, there's loyalty, hierarchy, strategy. Even the way they use military terms like soldiers and capos supports that image. Others saw it more as a sign of the times. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, war documentaries were pretty much the go-to for a certain kind of middle-aged man. The History Channel was full of woo stuff. Grainy footage, old generals talking, dramatic voiceovers. It wasn't unusual. For a lot of guys, that was just what you had on in the background, like comfort food for the mind. You'd see it all the time. Dad on the recliner, chips in hand, watching something about the Battle of the Bulge or Rommel's tactics in North Africa. It was almost like the default setting. But with Tony, it might have also been about nostalgia, that longing for a time when everything seemed more clear-cut. Wabu had good guys and bad guys. It was simple, black and white. That's not what Tony's life was like. He was stuck in this gray area trying to justify horrible things to himself, telling himself he was a soldier just doing what needed to be done. Those war docs, maybe they let him imagine he was part of something noble, something righteous, a way to feel like his own battles had meaning. It tied into how he viewed history in general. Tony often looked back on the past with rose-colored glasses. He'd talk about the older generation, how they had pride, how things used to be better. There's even that painting where Paulie had Tony dressed up like a general, and Tony hated it. Maybe because it was too on the nose, or maybe because it forced him to see himself the way others saw him, stripped of the illusion. Then again, maybe it wasn't that deep. Maybe he just liked history. It's true that Tony wasn't the kind of Bennett guy who'd sit down with a book, but documentaries, that was his way of learning. Simple, digestible, and it gave the illusion of productivity. He'd watch, eat some ice cream, and feel like he was sharpening his mind while staying in his comfort zone. Some folks chalk it all up to personality and generation. He was a middle-aged man of his time, raised on post-war ideals, shaped by a culture that revered strength and silence, the Gary Cooper type. Maybe he was just another boomer dad watching war stories to connect with something lost. Maybe it was a coping mechanism for the things he couldn't admit to himself. In the end, it might be all of those things, or none of them. Maybe it was just what was on TV. Maybe it was how he saw himself, or who he wished he could have been. Either way, it was a small, recurring detail that told you something about the man, even if he never said it out loud. It all comes back to that tense boat scene between Tony and Paulie in the episode Remember When. The kind of moment that creeps up in memory. Easy to forget, but unforgettable once it's recalled. One person watching it again admitted they must have been too drunk to remember it the first time around, and that's fair. It's one of those deceptively quiet moments where the real action is psychological. The big question on everyone's mind: would Tony have actually killed Paulie if he'd admitted to telling Johnny about Ralph's cruel joke about Jinny? Some thought absolutely yes. That confession would have sealed his fate. The boat ride, from that perspective, wasn't just a nostalgic getaway or a coincidence. It was a setup, a test. Earlier in the episode, Tony had even asked someone if Paulie had ever really been put to the test. That suggested Tony already had doubts, and the boat became the crucible. Others saw it more as a simmering possibility than a concrete plan. Tony might not have boarded the boat intending to kill Paulie, but once they were out at sea, isolated, no distractions, he started seriously thinking about it. Paulie, after all, couldn't keep his mouth shut, and Tony was visibly irritated. That trait, the non-stop talking, the way Paulie always had to fill the silence, grated on Tony more and more. Some compared the whole thing to the story of a finance minister in Louis XIV's court, who outshone the king and was eventually imprisoned for it. The allegory suggested that outshining or betraying the boss, even accidentally, was dangerous, a point that echoed in Paulie's case. A few viewers believed the only reason Paulie survived was logistical. Killing him would have caused too many complications. Everyone knew they were on the run together. There'd be questions, no body disposal plan, and no way to justify the killing without a confession, unless Paulie openly admitted to the betrayal. That would have given Tony a convenient reason, even if it wasn't entirely satisfying. But some thought Tony didn't even care about the joke anymore. It wasn't about that. It was about trust. about pressure. Tony wanted to see if Paulie would crack, if he could still be relied upon when things got serious. Paranoia was creeping in, and Tony was questioning who he could really count on. Paulie, who had been with him for so long, was suddenly under the microscope. There were some who thought Tony just wanted to scare Paulie, not patient him. A reminder that Tony was still the boss, that he could do it. That he would if he felt like it. The tension wasn't just about the joke or even Paulie's behavior. It was about dominance, authority, and frustration building to the point where a hatchet looked like a reasonable option. A few viewers leaned into the ambiguity. They felt the strength of the scene was that even Tony didn't know what he was going to do. The edit, the strengths, the way Tony watched Paulie. It all hung in the air, unresolved. There wasn't a plan, just an impulse, barely restrained. One comment even joked that Tony didn't whack Paulie because he needed him, not out of loyalty, but because there were so few competent men left in the crew. Paulie was a mess, sure, but the whole organization was barely more than a crew at that point. Sometime, keeping the devil you know is safer than cutting ties. And then, of course, someone mentioned the dream Tony had, where he shot Paulie. A subconscious hint, maybe, of what Tony really felt, or maybe just another part of the show's pattern of toying with lines between reality and impulse. In the end, no one could say for sure whether Paulie was ever really safe. Maybe Tony didn't know either, but that's what made the scene stick. The quiet threat, the unbearable small talk, and the sense that something terrible could have happened, but didn't. Oh, and by the way, someone still wants to know how they cooked all that pasta and bread on the boat. It all started after Bobby lost his wife, Karen. It was a devastating blow, not just to him, but to his whole family. He was known to be gentle, sensitive, maybe a little slow on the uptake emotionally. But he truly loved his wife. After her death, though, something shifted. He was promoted in the family business, which should have been a big moment, but instead of rising to the occasion, he retreated. The weight of grief, parenting, and responsibility just seemed to crush him. That's when Janice came in. At first, it looked like she might be a comforting presence, someone stepping in to help, to offer stability. But that idea crumbled quickly. She didn't just bring structure, she brought cruelty. The way she spoke to Bobby's children, especially Bobby Jr., was harsh, condescending, and completely inappropriate. There's a moment that really stood out. She mocked Bobby Jr. for wetting the bed, in front of everyone. That wasn't just overbearing parenting. That was emotional cruelty. And Bobby, he didn't step in. Well, except once, after Sophia's soccer game, he finally said something about how Janice had spoken to her. But other than that, he was stunned, passive. And that silence hurt more than anything. It made people wonder, how could a father let this happen? Some saw it as learned helplessness, that after living in a world where cruelty was normal, both in his job and family, he became numb to it. Others thought it was something deeper. That after Karen died, Bobby created a fantasy world to escape reality. Literally, his model trains became his sanctuary. In a way, it was innocent, even sweet. Unlike others around him who escaped through drugs or violence, Bobby just wanted something he could control, something that made sense. But that fantasy didn't protect his kids. It left them exposed. His daughter, Sophia, seemed to understand the situation better than he did, and Bobby Jr. When Bobby was murdered, the kid didn't even hesitate. He just wanted to leave and stay with other relatives. That says everything. There were different ways of looking at Bobby. Some felt sorry for him. They saw him as a good man, emotionally destroyed, trying to hold his life together with the only tools he had. Others thought he was just weak, That he didn't love Janice, didn't even like her, but stayed with her because it was easier than dealing with the loneliness or the effort of finding someone actually kind. A lot of people believed Janice had planned the whole thing, swooped in the moment she learned he was a widower, with her ease on becoming Mrs. Bacalieri. Janice, in the eyes of many, wasn't just bad. She was a manipulative, toxic force. Compared to her, even the show's most villainous characters started to look more honest in their evil. She didn't need to be violent. She used psychological warfare, the kind Bobby couldn't fight because he didn't even recognize it. Some said Bobby needed a strong woman, but not one like Janice. Someone nurturing, kind but firm. Others joked that if he'd ended up with someone like JoJo instead, at least the house would have been full of warmth and decent home-cooked meals. Even in the small things, Janice's manipulation showed, like when JoJo brought food over to comfort Bobby. Janice pretended to help, offered to do the dishes, but the second JoJo left, that facade dropped. It wasn't about supporting Bobby, it was about securing her position. In the end, Bobby's story was a quiet tragedy. A man who was, in many ways, decent and loyal, but emotionally unequipped for the storm that overtook his life. He couldn't stand up for himself, and more importantly, he couldn't stand up for his kids. And for that, some couldn't forgive him. Others, though, just shook their heads at the whole situation. Grief does strange things to people, and in Bobby's case, it left him wide open for someone like Janice to move in and take everything over. So there's this really intense story about a guy named Davey Scatino and how he got completely busted out by the mob. A storyline that's both tragic and eye-opening about what happens when you owe money to the wrong people. Davey was this guy who got himself tangled in gambling debts with Richie April, and things just spiraled out of control from there. His family, especially Carmela and Meadow, were furious with Tony because Tony accepted a car, an SUV no less, as partial payment for what Davey owed. But then you see Carmela later giving away some of that very same stuff to others, and Artie, another character, even serves mineral water to Carmela and Davey's wife. So there's this mix of resentment and complicity all around, which highlights how entangled everyone was in this mess. What really stands out is Davey's downward spiral. He first falls short on a few payments, then he pushes his luck by forcing his way into a high-stakes executive game, thinking it might be his way out. But gamblers rarely stop at one win. Davey gets greedy, digs himself deeper, and loses more. You see the contrast with Artie, who manages to hustle his way out of the game, unlike Davey who just keeps sinking. The real heartbreak is for Davey's wife and kids, caught in the fallout of his decisions. There's this perspective that while Davey made bad choices, he also showed his son what it means to stand by your debts, even if it costs everything. Some see Davey as a tragic figure who, in his flawed way, modeled responsibility, standing against the recklessness of Tony, who gambled away family money and the future college fund. Interestingly, the whole thing wasn't just about Davey being reckless. The mob system punishes late payments harshly, and that's what really killed him. The debt kept growing because of penalties and interest, no matter how much he paid. Unless it was the full amount, the principal just ballooned. Tony even visited Davey a couple of times, hoping to keep things afloat, but the debt was a spiraling black hole, designed to control and eventually crush him. Another layer to this is why Richie told Davey not to go to any games. It wasn't just about keeping him from deeper debt, but about preventing Davey from winning money he could use to pay Richie back. The mob benefits from people being in debt and dependent, so they often gift money as favors, knowing it will come back around with pressure later. In prison, this dynamic is even harsher. You can't accept any gifts without owing a heavy price. The show doesn't show all the details, but it's implied that the mob eventually wiped the slate clean, in exchange for Davey ordering whatever they demanded. So all the things Davey brought home, like the mineral water Artie served or the fishing rod Tony gave AJ, were basically freebies from the bust-out scheme. Carmela seemed clueless about where some of it came from, and Artie only knew he got a great deal, unaware it was at the expense of Davey. There's also a bit of irony and dark humor scattered through this story. For example, the episode was filmed at a real outdoor store, Ramsey Outdoor, and one commenter shared a personal memory of buying camping gear there. Connecting the fictional bust-out with a real-life place adds a strange layer of reality to the whole thing. People also reflected on how, if Tony and Richie hadn't busted Davey out, someone else would have eventually. Davey's debt and gambling addiction made him a liability, and it was only a matter of time before he was completely skinned by the mob. Richie might have bled him dry forever, but the executive game stunt forced their hand to just get it over with. Ultimately, this is a story without heroes. Both Tony and Davey were deeply flawed. Both made terrible decisions that ruined lives. Tony knowingly loaned money to a man he expected to fail, and Davey gambled with money he didn't have. It's a harsh look at how the mob operates, not with any sense of fairness or mercy, but coldly and methodically. And in the end, the whole bust-out saga highlights themes of debt, pride, and the crushing weight of consequences in that world. It's a vivid reminder that when you owe the mob, it's never just about money. It's about control, survival, and the high cost of trying to climb out once you're in too deep. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you agree or disagree? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates. Your opinions matter, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.